I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with the leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Jennifer Safavian, President and CEO, Autos Drive America. On today's episode, we'll explore how global automakers are driving U.S. growth from factories and workforce to technology and trade. We hope you enjoy this episode. Jennifer, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Grayson. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's great to have you here. Your organization is doing really good work. And one of the key messages that your organization promotes is a strong U.S. auto industry. How important is a strong U.S. auto industry? Because you hear terms, it's the backbone of America. But in your opinion, how important is a strong U.S. autos industry?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, listen, the auto industry here in the U.S. is extremely important for the manufacturing sector here in the U.S., for all the jobs that it creates here in the U.S., and both the direct and the indirect jobs, and what it does for our communities here in the United States. But it's just really important that the U.S. have a globally competitive auto industry, right? To be able to compete with other industries or other countries out there that also have auto industries. We believe here in the U.S. we have the most competitive auto industry, and we have that for a couple of reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later. But really, it has to do with the fact that we've got the North American region that is so highly integrated that really allows us to be such a strong competitive force.
Obviously, there's geopolitical issues. How does the U.S. continue to stay competitive in I'll call it a changing global economy?
Sure. So again, I think that has to do a lot with USMCA, to be honest with you. And that is something that went into force actually back in 2020. It was in President Trump's first term, where this was his first, big trade agreement with Mexico and Canada. And obviously it's important for other industries as well. But for the auto industry, it's critically important. So we went from NAFTA and then some changes were made, and now we have USMCA. But for the auto industry, Mexico, Canada, the US, our supply chains are so integrated that it is really critically important that it remains, this USMCA remains in force and actually viable. Because, you've probably heard the term, a vehicle crosses the border, whether it's Mexico or Canada, maybe 7 times before it's fully completed, with the inputs going back and forth. And that is absolutely true. So while we produce a lot of vehicles here in the US, we might get pieces of it from Mexico or Canada or vice versa. And so having a strong integrated North American market has really made the U.S. auto industry so competitive.
What impact has it? And I couldn't believe it. We finally did it. A rail now legally, the same operator can go from Mexico, United States to Canada, all on one track, now fully legal, fully operational without having to change. Has that had a positive impact because obviously the auto industry, it has a complex tiers of suppliers. Has that had a positive impact where you're able to get your members are able to get supplies faster, more cost effective than traditionally they were?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, we try to do as much as we can, obviously here in the U.S., because the closer the supply chain is, the better, right? The easier it is and the less expensive it is. But you can't do everything here in the U.S. And so that is why some things are done in Mexico, some things are done in Canada, and yet we're all so close, right? Our closest neighbors, our closest allies that we've got, that these resilient supply chains with all 3 countries that really make the U.S. automotive industry, like I said, so competitive and allows us to produce as many vehicles as we do here in the U.S.
And you're right. You're geographically correct. And for our listeners who might not know, if you're in Detroit, you look across the river, there's Windsor. It's literally right. It's literally right there. And your members have plants there.
It is. Yes. So 2 of my members, Honda and Toyota, do have manufacturing facilities in Canada, of course. And of course, they have, a lot more here in the United States, right? And of course, many of my members have facilities in Mexico as well. So again, they are integrated. They produce in all 3 countries. And of course, those inputs, the supply chains, are what makes it so critically important. And again, it allows the North American region to be competitive, say, with China, for instance, right? Which has a huge auto industry over there, and our North American region here in USMCA allows us to be globally competitive.
We have to be globally competitive. If you look at the European market, this is spooky. I was in France over the summer, and I saw more BYD dealerships than I saw Renault dealerships. I said, "Whoa,
is that right?"
That was, to me, was a wake up call.
Yes,
but yeah, it just seems that the same thing could happen here. But if we don't, we have to have the right policies in place. Where it seems that Europe is going all in on the Chinese manufactured vehicles, and the same thing's going to happen here if we don't have policy. So how do you ensure that the U.S. auto industry stays strong? Is it getting really good policies in place?
Yeah. So, Europe is a really a case study, to be honest. It's something that we've looked closely at. And I think policymakers here in the US have watched it as well. So Europe has definitely seen an influx of Chinese EVs, for instance, right, into their market at a much reduced rate than what the manufacturers in Europe are able to produce. And a lot of that is because, of course, the subsidies that the Chinese government give to their OEMs in order to do that, which, really is an unfair, not a level playing field. Right, it's an unfair advantage when you're comparing, the OEMs to each other. And so what Europe has found, and they did an investigation into this just a year or so ago, where they did a full-fledged investigation to find out whether or not distorting the market because of the government subsidies to these OEMs, and they found that they were. And so because of that, they put extra kind of, tariffs, if you will, on the Chinese vehicles coming in, and not necessarily the BYD, for instance, not necessarily a Chinese OEM, but it encompasses other automakers who make vehicles in China and then ship them, import them into the EU. So the U.S. government has looked at that. I'll be honest with you, and I think there is concerns certainly that these Chinese OEMs, who again have an unfair advantage over the U.S. OEMs here producing in the U.S. If they were to bring vehicles here into the market, that they would just kind of perhaps really be harmful to the U.S. auto industry. And so what you've seen are some policies already in place, right? We've got tariffs on any Chinese OEM or any Chinese vehicle to come into the United States at over 100% right now, right? So right now you hear the Chinese OEMs talk about how they're not even looking at the U.S. market. And that very well may be true, but I think that there is always that hope, planning down the road, that perhaps they'll find a way to get here in the U.S. market. Right now they're expanding across the world, right? You see more vehicles, I might understand, in Mexico, for instance. Certainly in Latin American countries, they're kind of getting inroads there, and they are starting to build those production facilities in those countries. So it is definitely something that the U.S. auto industry is keeping a very close eye on, as well as, I would say, policymakers here in D.C.
You have to. We go back in history. If you look at the initial Belt and Road Initiative that China did, and nobody talked about it, it's still alive and well. And you're right. There are factories in Mexico for BYD. The Chinese vehicles are now in the Caribbean, and they're slowly, if you want to say, is surrounding us. But as they get closer and closer to U.S. shores, the one thing that I think a lot about, and there's court cases, there's massively public documents. You could probably fill up the White House with the documents. Data. How concerned are your members with data and data leakage? As we've seen patents get stolen, we've seen the FBI stop people at airports because your members are building some of the world's most important technology, and then it just so happens somebody must be Mr. Bad Guy and take something over there and produce it cheaper. How do your members protect data?
Listen, that's a critically important aspect for my members, is the consumer data, if that's what you're talking about, to protect that. Absolutely. They take extra precautions, if you will, and extra safety measures in order to protect consumers' data. Listen, right now, there is some technology that they have to rely on China. And, we are here in the U.S. constantly innovating and coming up with new technology, but it takes some time. I mean, China has had years of advance work on some of these areas, right? And so they're ahead of us. We can learn from them, though, too, right? And then we can take it to another level, which is exactly what we're trying to do. And that's going to take a little bit of time, but it's happening right now. So in the meantime, we're using what we need to. I think that my members feel very secure in what they put in the vehicles for consumers here in this market and other markets. So I don't think that that's something that consumers should be too concerned about.
Well, it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a reassuring thing for the public, the motoring public, if you want to use that term. And you're starting to see a lot of policy changes now. And one big policy thing that you're seeing, obviously you have manufacturing, but then you're also seeing minerals and refining minerals in the U.S. Are your members actively engaged? And if you want to call it securing the supply chain or bringing the supply chain closer to home, are they actively working on those policies?
Yes, we have been. It is something here at Autos Drive that we speak with policymakers on the Hill about often, and with the administration about trying to make changes to our current policy rules. Right, permitting reform is critically important. You hear that talked about a lot, but we haven't really seen any real movement on that front, and that would be really important to have more mining capabilities here in the U.S. But also another thing that we talk about that's really important is we here in the U.S. When we get kind of up and running, and of course, not everything is going to be here in the U.S. But again, to build those strong relationships with our closest allies, right, and trading partners, because they have those critical minerals as well, right? China has a lot of them, and not only in China, but in other countries as well. But we need to make sure that we work with those other countries that we're the closest with and we have those good relationships with to make sure that those critical minerals, that we have access to those, so that China doesn't have a chokehold on that, because they are really important for the industry going forward.
And then we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the tariffs. Has that had any impact on the relationships that your members have had around doing trading? Well, we got tariffs, but we got to renegotiate it. Any impact that your members have seen?
Well, no question, there has been an impact on the U.S. auto industry, right? Because the tariffs, there's a 25% tariff, right, on imported autos and auto parts. It was even higher for some other countries, right? And then, of course, those have been changed over time, right? So now we're looking at a 15% tariff on autos and auto parts from, again, some of our closest allies, Japan, the EU, Korea, right, where we get a lot of our not only finished vehicles, but parts, right? Part important for the supply chain. So there's been some reduction in that because of the negotiations that the Trump administration has undertaken with those countries. There's been exceptions made when it comes to USMCA compliant vehicles and parts, right? Which has been helpful as well. But there's absolutely no question about it that tariffs have had an impact on the industry, right? Because it's an additional cost that the industry is having to pay, right? So I think I saw something recent at the end of October, perhaps, that the industry, the automakers themselves, have already spent $30 billion on tariffs. That's the cost of tariffs as of the end of October. And those went into effect around March? So for that time span there, you're looking at $30 billion for the OEMs. And that doesn't even take into account what the suppliers are having to pay, right? And that's another big concern that I will tell you that the OEMs have with regard to these tariffs, is the impact that it has on those smaller suppliers, right? So, the tier two, threes, and below, right? The smaller ones, but they have such critical pieces that are necessary for production here in the U.S. that if they're not able to manage the increased costs of these tariffs and they have problems to fulfill their orders, I mean, that forces us to slow down or even reduce production here in the U.S. So it's something that has been really, really of concern to my members, is the supplier base and making sure that they remain healthy and stable in order to get us those inputs.
Some of your members have very, very healthy balance sheets. They also have credit lending arms. Are you seeing anything of your members either lending capital, investing in the lower suppliers to ensure they can get those critical parts they need to build vehicles?
Without question, yes, they are definitely, and I can't speak for every member individually, but they have had those discussions with suppliers, and if they can help them, they absolutely are trying to find ways to be helpful, because again, we can't lose the supplier base. That just prevents us from producing here in the U.S.
Are you seeing any movement of your members investing in the U.S.? If you want to say that's the purpose of the tariffs, to invest in the U.S., are you seeing any of that occurring at a say meaningful level?
So, for the auto industry, I mean, there are years to plan, right? For where they put a new production facility, what lines they're going to produce, what models, all of that. It takes years to plan, right? So I would say, a lot of things that we're seeing, and we have seen even this year, production at two new facilities here in the U.S., right? You've got Hyundai's Meta plant in Georgia, and you've got Toyota's new battery facility in North Carolina. Those were in the works for a while, right? They can't be made overnight. But I will say that my members, given the tariffs, certainly are analyzing all of that and the impact and the costs involved. Remember, all of these automakers are global. So they produce here in the U.S., not just for the U.S. market, but for other markets. Same goes when they produce in other countries, right? They're not just some come to the US, but they go to other markets too. So they want to make sure that they're going someplace where when they create a new manufacturing facility and produce vehicles, that they're able to not only do it for that location where they're producing, but for other places as well. So there's a lot that goes into play when they make these large kind of decisions. And again, it takes years of planning. But I will say, and I think many of them have said that they plan to increase their investments here in the U.S. They've been doing that all along, but they plan to do even more of that to kind of help offset the tariffs, but also because they want the U.S. automotive industry to be strong and competitive. And so they're doing more and more here in the U.S. And again, that was happening prior to the tariffs, and it's going to continue to happen after the tariffs. But one last point I'll just make, that $30 billion in tariffs that I mentioned, that cost, unfortunately, that's $30 billion that cannot be now invested here in the U.S. because it's paying these tariff costs. So there is, of course, limited amount of funds out there. And so, that plays into the consideration as well when they're kind of trying to plan and map out the future of where they're going to produce, what models, where the lines are going to be made, and things like that.
How do they make the decisions of where they're going to put a new facility? Is it state incentives? Is it access to ports? What goes into that decision process of where they're going to put a new facility?
Yeah, I think all that and many more things, right? I think energy is a very big piece of where they decide that they're going to build a new facility, because that's critically important these days. Workforce is another one. I mean, obviously, you can't build a huge facility and in an area where you're not going to have workers available to work that place, right? So there are so many considerations that go into where they're going to put a new facility. And keep in mind, these are massive facilities, manufacturing facilities we're talking about, that employ thousands of people. So they're not, that's why there's so much planning that goes involved in it. But no question about it. Certainly the states try to give incentives to bring them to their state, because of course that is more jobs, right? It's more economic benefit for the state. So there's definitely a plus for a state to get one of these facilities. But for the manufacturer's perspective, they need to make sure that there are the resources there, that the workforce is there, and there's the support there as well.
We both know several politicians, but there's one I'll remove the individual's name, but he said to me over dinner, he said, I want manufacturing jobs. And I was like, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Why do you want manufacturing jobs? He goes, because they're sticky jobs and they're high paying jobs and they're good jobs. And I never forgot that. And that's all. He wanted to diversify his economy, to his region's economy, to have the manufacturing, because the stability there. When you're members look at investing, to me it's like, okay, so you have skilled labor, you have really great individuals, different skills. Are we seeing investments into the apprenticeship programs, into the vocational school? So if you call it, you have that talent pipeline.
Yes, without question. And I'm glad you raised that, because that is something that is so critically important to my members and has been for years. So not only their current workforce, right? They're continuing to upskill and reskill their current workforce. And they do that through a lot of workforce development programs that they've got, but also the future. Right, generation of workers, right? And they do that. And honestly, they're starting to do that even as young as grade school, and even more at middle school, and then high school becomes even more focused on that. And the reason being is because you want these students to understand what manufacturing today means, right? I think for a lot of people, a lot of their parents probably think of manufacturing as something that's just kind of old and dirty and loud and not something that you want. It is not what today's manufacturing is like, certainly not for the automotive industry. And I've been to numerous plants, and I'm always amazed when I go in at just how kind of quiet, how clean, how bright these facilities are, and how innovative they are. And so for students, especially these days, right, who are very much into video games, all this technology that's way above my head, these are pathways for them that I think that they need to understand are out there. And so my members definitely put a lot of emphasis and focus a lot on partnerships with local schools in their communities. And that's what I mean, like the grade school and the high school level. But then, of course, the community colleges, other colleges and universities, where they actually put together programs that help prepare workers so when they come out of these programs, they're ready to immediately get to work. And then, of course, there's a lot of things my members do when it comes to apprenticeships. And even when they get people into the plant and allow them to kind of continue their education, they'll help pay for that. There's just a lot of pathways, I think, for them to not only get into manufacturing, but to thrive, to build a career out of it. There are just so many different pathways that I think people fully understand in today's manufacturing, and certainly for the auto industry.
The video games are interesting. You go back 20 years. Wow, video games are going to rot your brain. The next thing you know, some of the best video game players are drone pilots for the U.S. military. They're inventing and building companies, but the core that underpins that and what underpins your members is software.
Yes.
What type of investments are they making in software, and how are they attracting the talent? Because the software talent's a hot commodity these days.
It is very much so, very much so. And so that goes to the whole part about trying, I think, to get in early with students to make sure that they understand that these jobs are available, right? That these are critically necessary to the industry to help continue to make us innovative. And so we need those skilled workers, right? And we'll help skill them. But definitely for those who kind of love that and thrive in that area, that is what today's manufacturing is. So it's not just, putting parts into cars necessarily, right? There's so much more to it. And so they really spend a lot of time, I think, focusing on that and educating them and training, right? Again, they do a lot with STEM, with schools and universities in order to kind of prepare students for today's workforce.
And it's changing. Automation is showing up in factories, and I say to somebody, I will credit the Wall Street Journal because they came up with the term the robot wranglers. There's all these new jobs that are being created. How are your members thinking about automation? Are they actively embracing it? Are they using it? How are they thinking about it?
Yeah, they are. There's no question about it. Again, if you go into one of our facilities, you will see a lot of automation. And that's really important for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, we're talking about very heavy, big pieces, right? That you need assistance, right? You don't want to injure a worker, and it's for their safety, right? And for their health. So there are a lot of things that are automated just to make things easier, honestly, for the workforce. So that, number one, is what's critically important. But number two, it also helps kind of speed things along. It makes production smoother, faster, right? But again, we need that workforce to kind of to set that up, to keep it running smoothly, right? We need people who understand it from another angle, right? So I know a lot of people are concerned that it'll take away jobs, and that is not what it's doing. In fact, we're seeing just the opposite. It's just creating a different pathway for different careers, if you'll have it, for these workers.
Bingo! You hit the nail on the head, because you're going to get an individual who might like robotics but has no interest in cars. Well, hey, this is a big robot to play with. Let's go this career path, and you get a different demographic, different individuals interested in it. That's a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I don't know if you've ever been into a facility or not to see this up close and firsthand, but I mean, it is pretty amazing to see the different things that are happening in the facility that are automated. And again, for me, all of this is way above my knowledge, but it is fascinating what is being done today. And again, you need that workforce that understands it to continue that growth.
Yeah, because it's all about growth. Are there any numbers that your members have published from when they put automation, they're able to create X more amount of vehicles a year? Anything along those numbers that they've ever made public?
I'm not aware of anything like that. It's a good question that you have, and I am not aware of anything like that. I will say, certainly as newer facilities are being built, they're doing more of that. For instance, the Hyundai Meta plant down in Georgia, it's fully electric vehicle battery manufacturer facility for them. And it's one of the most technology advanced manufacturing facilities. There are more than 850 robots and almost 300 automated guided vehicles working alongside their workforce in order to produce the vehicles there. So it's definitely, it's like I said, it helps the workers and it helps certainly produce vehicles, but I don't know if there's any solid data or numbers out there on it.
And thanks for highlighting the Hyundai plant. I will go on the record and I will say that is going to be one of the most important, if not the world's most important factory for robotaxis. Everything that they're building there with the Ioniq 5s, the AV Ride deal, the Waymo deal, most important factory. And it's truly incredible what they're going to build there. And those vehicles will go to the United States. Those vehicles will go to the UK. They'll go to Europe. So that comes down to exports. And we talked about a little bit earlier, 10%, 20%? How many of the vehicles here, percentage-wise, would you say are exported overseas?
So my members, and again, I can just speak to my members. Last year, they exported it was the value of 31 billion in vehicles were exported to 130 countries and territories around the world, right? So a significant portion. And I'll tell you, I'll just give you another example. For instance, one of my members, BMW, their manufacturing facility down in Spartanburg, South Carolina, not only do they build vehicles there for of course, the U.S. market, but they build the more vehicles are exported from that facility than are actually sold here in the U.S. So it's actually they build more than you need for the U.S. market, right? And you see those they build the X down there, right? So the X3, 5s, and all the 7s and all that, and they export those around the world. So you'll see those in other countries, and they're built in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
And they created jobs in that local community.
Absolutely. That is why we so much stress the need for trade policies that kind of encourage, right, more of those American-made vehicles being exported into other countries. It's critically important because the more we can make here, again, our market here in the U.S. is small. About 95% of the world's consumers are outside of our borders. So we can't just build vehicles here in the U.S. for the U.S. market. We wouldn't build that many, right? We have to be able to build American-made vehicles and then export them and sell them in other countries. That's what's going to create the growth here in the U.S. automotive industry. That's what's going to create more jobs here in the U.S.
And then if you look at it, 500 facilities across 36 states with 31 manufacturing facilities in 12 states and 76 R&D facilities in 15 states. The economic impact of that community and that region is astronomical. There is a headline, and I'll never forget this. It was the front page of the LA Times. This one hurts, is when Toyota went to Texas. When they left Carson, California, went to Texas. And the economic impact that's had in the region of there in Texas is incredible. When he first went there, like, oh, you're in the middle of nowhere. Now it's a thriving metropolis around called Toyota Land. It's a really, truly amazing, the economic impact that this has.
Without question. And, listen, here at Autos Drive America, every year we put together our annual economic impact report is what we call it. And it's on our website. So anyone can look at it and pull it up. And not only does it show kind of the national numbers that you were talking about, but it also shows every state, right? We show the impact that our automakers, and we do it with the dealers, with the international dealers, the impact that we have in every state in the country. And of course, you're going to see certainly more of an impact in states where we have manufacturing than in states where we don't. But every state has seen an economic impact from international automakers and dealers here in the U.S.
It's positive, but there's a lot of change happening here, and I'm really loving you taking this. There was the whole push towards EVs. Now it's hybrid, and then you're seeing the revival. Some of your members have put out press releases publicly stating that they're going to double down on ICE investments. How do they plan for the uncertain political environment that goes around the policies as it relates to powertrains? How do they plan for that? Because you said it, that takes years, and then I say it takes billions of dollars one way or another. So how do they plan for this?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And you're absolutely right. Certainly when the political climate changes and the priorities change from one administration to another, I mean, it's difficult, right, to plan for businesses to plan in that type of environment. But that's what we do. But you're right. In the auto industry, certainly, the Biden administration was pushing more of the electric vehicles, right? And so automakers are trying to respond to that. And the Trump administration is kind of pushing the opposite and not wanting the government to kind of mandate that. I will tell you first and foremost, my members focus on what the consumer wants, and they want to make sure that they provide them as many options as they can to make sure that they provide vehicles that fit whatever the consumer wants, whatever their family needs, whatever their business needs. So that's why they provide all these different options and really leave it up to the consumer to decide what it is that they want. The consumer is going to drive this one way or the other.
The consumer has the pocketbook. They've got the wallet. And you're right. You can mandate policies, tax, whatever you want. But the consumer, if they don't want it, they'll rebel at the end of the day.
That's exactly right. And listen, we can produce all sorts of vehicles, but we don't make money producing those vehicles. We make money selling those vehicles, right? So it ultimately will once again come down to the consumer and their choice. And again, my members want to make sure they provide them with lots of options, lots of choices, so they get exactly what it is that they need.
And I mean, if if all the Fed things hold, interest rates are going to go down. It's going to be a tailwind for your members. They're going to be able to sell more vehicles because the financing will be cheaper there. There's a lot of change, but there's a lot of positive stuff happening in the auto industry. And for listeners that's sitting here listening, saying, okay, this is really interesting. What is the big thing that you want them to take away as it relates to the positive impact that the auto industry has on the U.S. economy?
So that's a great question, and I would say, one of the things that we manage and kind of talk about a lot here at Autos Drive America with policymakers is making sure they understand the positive impact that my members are having here in the United States. You might think that that's obvious. I mean, we've just talked about how many facilities there are across the country, right? The economic impact that it has in certain states and nationwide. But you might be surprised to learn that policymakers don't fully understand the breadth, right, of their investments, of their workforce, of the production here in the U.S. For instance, for the last 2 years running, my members have outproduced the Detroit automakers here in the U.S. They've produced more vehicles for the last 2 years than the Detroit automakers do. Most people would say they didn't know that. They can't believe it. That seems hard to imagine, but it's true. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is just really honestly educating policymakers and the public as well on really the investments in the production and our workers here in the United States, because it's significant. A couple of what I call fun facts, because I don't think people really understand them. And to me, I think they're kind of fun things to talk about. For instance, Toyota's largest manufacturing facility in the world, right, is located in Georgetown, Kentucky, right? It is massive how big it is. And people they would think it's probably in Japan, right, or someplace else. It's actually in Kentucky. It's 9 million square feet or 169 football fields large. That's the equivalent of 169 football fields. That's massive. BMW, I mentioned them earlier in Spartanburg, South Carolina. That's also their largest manufacturing facility in the world. It's not in Germany. It's here in the U.S. And one more example I'll give you is Subaru, one of my other members. They produce in Japan. The only other place where they have a manufacturing facility is here in the U.S. So my members are dedicated to this U.S. market. They want to make sure that the U.S. automotive industry is globally competitive, continues to grow. We believe that we are the growth of the U.S. auto industry. And so that is something that we spend a lot of time talking about and focusing on with policymakers and the public, just to make sure they understand really all that is being done here in the U.S.
And your member Subaru had probably the greatest ad campaign of all time with the Outback. That became synonymous with them and the millions of vehicles that they sold just based on with the Paul Hogan with the Outback there. The bottom line is this. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I love their puppy videos or commercials. So
they do a lot of great marketing. The bottom line is your members are investing here. And with the work that you're doing is ensuring that the right policy is there for the investment. Because if the policy is not right, your members are not going to invest. And they have a long history of investing, creating jobs, and having a positive economic impact on the U.S. economy. And we wish you well, because what you're doing is positive. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is a strong and thriving U.S. auto industry. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Grayson, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as SAE SoCal Dean Case brings decades of experience to a conversation on the future of the auto industry.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.